Me. Appreciate being here. It's a great environment and looking forward to connecting with you all and learning. I'm going to move relatively quickly. You just heard a bit about me. I've sort of come through this journey, sort of what I'll describe as data adjacent. I am not from a marketing and analytics background, but over time have sort of gotten closer and closer to it as it's become more important for us. And as we describe ourselves at Energy as a global creative boutique. We're part of the broader BBDO network, and as a result have some really big global clients, particularly in CPG, but also operate as a sort of standalone full service offering, which gives us sort of a unique opportunity to work sort of across all touch points. And that's been a big part of our evolution. You can see our clients there. Again, a lot of CPG, which sort of has, in some, impact, in some ways, dictated our evolution in this space. So our data DNA, if you will, is really rooted in classic marketing science. Doing work over the years, whether it's problem definition, market structure, brand fitness, things really designed to get at the business and marketing analytics. And now, what is that evolution for us? And really, we start like everybody else did in sort of the baseline digital world, looking at how do creative diagnostics inform our work? So looking at, in the early days of Facebook, you're very much looking at how forms and formats impact results. And that's, pretty straightforward and for this group, very basic. Then we started to look at, as our evolution shifted and sort of the landscape changed for us, building deeper partnerships with the platforms that our clients are working most with. As a creative agency, it became really clear we needed to be closer with them than maybe they expected us to want to be or need to be, but really understanding how our work was going to work in those platforms became, super critical if we were going to be successful. And that has really helped us inform our internal teams, particularly our creative teams, to really understand how their work needs to translate in that environment. But, as we all know, that was not going to be enough. And as we thought about the next sort of phase in our evolution, really it became clear in a media environment that is so much more fractured than ever before, a retail landscape where, again, we're looking at, with our clients to really help them understand and navigate. They're not selling through the same channels that they always were, and that they're going to be able to be more nimble in the future. And then a consumer who frankly is expecting more from brands and their brand experiences. And so it really became a question of what tools were we going to bring into the agency to really help power that evolution. And luckily, really for us, it became about really understanding how do we move from this sort of mass world where, classic brand marketing with a creative agency like ours was really about building that brand from the top down and trying to push people through this idea of a funnel, which we all know doesn't really exist anymore. And as we think about that evolution, really thinking about what data can we use in the most addressable ways or from the most addressable sources, and then how does that inform everything as we move back up into those broader spaces? Because as we all know, over time, those mass channels are becoming increasingly addressable. So for us, it's really about building that capacity and capability for that future state. Luckily, Omnicom is developing a tool called Omni, which is really designed to help facilitate the translation that's always existed for us as a creative agency. We have always used data from a variety of sources to define a prime prospect for a client or brand. And then you go through sort of an integrated process where you're working with multiple partners who ultimately, with their own separate tools, are translating that interpretation of who that brand and prime prospect is to their own tools. So you're playing a bit of a telephone game as you go from how we think about the customer or consumer, and then how a media partner or media agency might translate that to their world. And this is designed to really connect, the who and really understand from a variety of sources, be it purchase data, location data, web consumption data, a singular ID that then can be translated directly into, with our Omnicom media partners, into an inventory graph to be able to buy those people directly. And that's, really my task in taking on this role at the end of last year was really about how does that change our process? Like what does that look like? And as we've thought about the components of this tool, really for us, it's about building that that data-informed audience, that view of the consumer starting first, really more collaboration with our media agency partners to really get to understanding how that audience design translates across the media landscape. And then from an activation standpoint, really starting to look at, and this is part of what's going to change for us, how does activation and that personalized brand experience change what we create as an agency? It really has a huge impact potentially on our creative output and the content we create for brands, be it automation, sort of ongoing optimization. And then obviously continuing to understand and optimize that overall experience. And really, it's an Omnicom level tool, but we have to figure out a way that works with our sort of approach and culture as an agency to really translate what that means. And we're at the very early stages of this, but we started to see sort of impacts in a few key ways, and to sort of jump into the brief and that sort of core thing that powers our process. And for us, it's really been a shift to get our teams and folks thinking about the role of audiences and what that means. And it comes down to moving the brief from, I've got a consumer I need to do something with, to really start to think about what is our hypothesis for the audience structure that we need to drive the growth of a brand. To the earlier point about, it's not just driving top of mind awareness anymore. It's really about what are the most valuable audiences that we can find and how do we reach them directly. And for tools like this, it might be taking that sort of classic segmentation and being able to look at that all the way through the sort of integrated process. It also might be looking at specific areas of focus, whether that's an affinity or other ways we're looking at the market, whether it's usage. And then specifically within a category audience, if you have high churn categories, understanding the folks who have lapsed out and being able to go into your current customers and find those most likely to churn. Those are questions that in some ways we haven't really needed to think about as a creative agency over the years. It was really about building that brand in the broadest sense possible. But now with these levels of targeting, it's really pushing us in new directions. Just to give you a simple example, which I think will be head nods for everybody, classic sort of partnerships with things like the NFL. We would activate that typically from a sort of classic location. We've got teams in multiple markets. We're going to focus on fans in those markets. Well, now we can get really specific on understanding where those fans are regardless of market. And it's not a huge shift, but it also helps us be more efficient in what we do and be more efficient in talking to the consumer. And even navigating things like that, as we work through this tool and process, you start to see where it's less about the specifics of the data and more about how do you stitch the wiring together, moving your media buys, which might have been at a very sort of reach-based model, into delivering this level of targeting. You really have to have that conversation with clients, with your media partners, because they need to change how they buy to really enable this level of delivery. And for a lot of our CPG clients, it just hasn't been a part of the conversation. So part of this is less about the tools themselves and more about that sort of cultural change that you need to sort of create in how you deliver the work. In terms of the work itself, with all of this sort of available data and all of the ways to sort of slice it, we really need our strategists and creatives to really be thinking about what is the way we want to sort of think about this audience and divide this audience out in a way that there's something meaningful to say. I might know that this pain reliever consumer has an affinity for music. There's really nothing that pain reliever has to say about music that is meaningful and different. So we really have to think about those audience strategies in the context of having something important to say and something different. And I think that's part of where you really are having an ongoing conversation with clients about, yes, you can segment your audience. Yes, you should, but let's find the right places that are going to drive the most impact for you. And in some cases, that may be doing less than more. And then from a creative standpoint, really getting our teams to think about ingredients versus meals. There's nothing sort of creative agency teams love than a big brand challenge that they can solve with, frankly, a large piece of film. It's just what their DNA is. And I think as we think about all of those consumer touch points that we've been talking about today, which ones can we sort of reduce the complexity by thinking about sort of those ingredients and how you're going to sort of get that audience to react to you, to see you. And that's a different sort of creative approach that's less about that big creative process and more about the very tactical, how are we thinking about moving this consumer to the next touch point in the experience. From a people standpoint, we've made a big focus on building an integrated team. And the balance that we have to strike is, where do you need specialists versus where do you build into your core process increased facility in using data, in understanding the landscape. And for us, the first stage is really about improving and building our core teams around this increased capacity. It starts with this sort of core group of strategy, account management, marketing science, from a business, consumer, and sort of data standpoint, collaborating on the design of those audiences and really building that into the process. But also what we found is they have to have a much higher facility with the media landscape. And for an agency that doesn't have media in-house, that's a big leap. We don't engage in that media ecosystem in the way that most of you do. So for us, it's thinking about how do we train those skills and that understanding of that environment so that we can be better partners at the start of the process in understanding what's real and what's possible. There's nothing that kills collaboration more than to walk to a media partner and be like, we want to do this, and it's so far from what's real and possible in the landscape that it just sort of kills that conversation. So that's a big part of this and really building that deeper partnership. And then in the future, thinking about the role that sort of data science and the idea of machine learning and artificial intelligence will play in an agency like ours. And I think, we've made the decision to sort of work into that over time and see where it makes sense for us as an agency. The way we work with our clients in the industries that they're in, there's less of a need in the short term, and it's doing the basics right first that will deliver that more advanced thinking and the opportunity to do that more advanced thinking later. So that's something that we're working across Omnicom to bring that data science to us in more of a partnership fashion, and then over time look to build out those capabilities. And then, the implications for us and the conversations we're having with the clients, they're just as eager to build this capability. And I think the 4 things that we've seen in these conversations over the last year or so is, you got to figure out what you're going to invest to build the capability. And it takes time to build those things, and it has to be thought of in the same way that you're going to build a factory or a new line to manufacture something. This is something that needs that kind of investment. Committing to learning, we know how fractured sometimes the measurement landscape can be, so what is that unified learning agenda that can power this process? The role clarity, particularly on the client side, as they all sort of, you've got marketing service, you've got a data team, you've got core brand teams. Each of them has a role to play in the process, and understanding what that role is and who's going to drive internally, helps streamline that process as we work together. And then ultimately, as they redesign their approach, really thinking about their approach to building brands and how that changes. We had the earlier speaker talk about that idea of the brand experience being less about the advertising at the top of the funnel and more about, what is that individual touch point going to contribute, and then what do we need to bring to that? And that changes a lot of what their ingoing assumptions are, whether they need another campaign versus simply doing better targeting and understanding the impact of that targeting being, providing better output for them and better ROI than just putting another campaign in market and seeing what happens. So really thinking about how that approach sort of shifts over time. So what we've learned so far, I think we've sort of been on this journey. I think we started late relative to what most of you guys do every day, and so we're in the process of kind of catching up. And as we've learned, it's clear that the data is never as perfect as you want it to be. We're looking at data from such a wide range of sources. Some of it has a ton of value. Some of it is, sometimes noise that you want to sort of figure out a way to sort through. We have to be more creative in our internal thinking about how we're going to drive growth. Again, moving beyond strategies that are, we just need another better, quote unquote, campaign, and really thinking about what is the key to unlocking that growth, whether it's understanding the usage, understanding the competitive landscape, but really sort of thinking in new ways and navigating that. We have to show immediate benefits. I mean, understanding how this is going to sort of change for brands over time, but really being able to capitalize on in-market learning and moving quickly versus versus building some system that you deploy 2 years from now. I mean, by the time that happens, you already need to evolve again. We need everybody to be involved in this data, really getting into these systems and understanding what's there and what's possible versus something that somebody's going to hand them an answer that they can react to. And that it's going to evolve for us, every day as we learn more, as the tools themselves develop, as the ecosystem evolves. It's been an interesting process that's sort of challenged our assumptions in some ways, but I think over time we're sort of making slow and steady progress. So that's it for me.
Josh, thank you. Great. That sets us up nicely, and let me ask Brooke and Rob to come forward.